Welcome back to 0 to 1000. We've covered a lot of concepts so far, but now it's time that we put it all together. In this episode, we're building your thinking system. What to do before the game even starts, and how to make decisions during the game. That way, by the end, you'll know exactly how to approach every single position with a clear plan in mind. Let's quickly cover a massively overlooked point: warming up. Most players just sit down and jump into a game cold, and it shows. Spending even 5 minutes on puzzles, reviewing openings, or looking over previous games will instantly sharpen your focus for the entire session. That little bit of prep work can be the difference between blundering on move 5 or actually playing your best chess right from the start. The next decision we need to go through before we start a game is what time control we play. If you're serious about improving, I recommend you pick as long of a time control as you're willing to play. I'll explain why when we break down the in-game thinking system, but here's the short version. We need time to really think through our moves. If your goal is to learn, longer games are going to help slow you down, calculate, and really apply everything you've learned in these videos, and that's where the real growth is going to happen. And now that we've gone through the pre-game thinking, we can go through our in-game thinking system. What we need is a system of steps that we're going to think about on every single chess move. That's the only way that we can consistently improve and get better at chess, is by consistently reforming that system and getting better at having a clear system of thinking. The system I'm going to recommend of thinking for in-game chess goes by the acronym TIPS. And I'm going to go through each of those sections one by one. The T stands for threats. And what that means is the first thing we have to do after every single one of our opponent's moves is scan for if it creates any threats in the position. Looking at one of my students' games for an example, in this position, his opponent plays a move, pawn to d4. Here we need to evaluate, did our opponent's move create a threat? Well, if we ignore this move, he has two attackers on the e5 pawn, and we only have one defender. Therefore, we've evaluated that this move does indeed create a threat. The next letter I stands for ideas, or winning ideas. What we're going to look for in every position after opponents' moves, after we've scanned for their threats, is we're going to scan for if we have any winning ideas ourselves. In my student's game, he captures the knight with his bishop, and then the opponent captures back with the queen. Now, after we've identified that there's no threats from our opponent here, we need to identify if we have any winning ideas ourselves. What you might find in the position is that the c2 pawn is hanging, so that would actually qualify as a winning idea for ourselves. Once you've identified your opponent's threats, and you've identified your own winning ideas, you then have to start thinking about plans, which is the next letter. In this exact position, my student identified that there's no threats from his opponent, and he has a winning idea of knight takes c2. So, according to his planning, he can just simply win the pawn for free, which is what he plays in the game. This is one example of a plan based on your opponent having no threats and yourself having a winning idea. If I jump back to earlier in the game, when his opponent played the move pawn to d4, we identified that this move created a threat on the e5 pawn. My student here had no winning ideas to win material, so he decided to come up with a plan, and his choice of plan was to simply defend his e5 pawn. Here's another example of a position. What you can identify here is that there's no threats from our opponent in this position, and at the same time, there's not really any winning ideas for ourselves. Therefore, it's time to start coming up with plans based around the other concepts we know of, like development, king safety, or converting a win, if that is the case. In this position, my student comes up with the plan that he should stick to the simple opening principles of developing all of his pieces. Because there are no threats and there's no winning ideas, he chooses to develop his light square bishop to g4, setting up a pin on this knight. These are 3 different examples of plans that you can come up with based around the threats and ideas that you've identified in the position. And finally, we get to the last letter, which is S, and it stands for safety check. And it's a very simple concept. Before you physically pick up the piece and play the move that you have in your head, you need to do a quick blunder check in your head to make sure that you're not blundering something away. In this position, my student wanted to play the move knight to f6. However, what he failed to do was perform a safety check and realize that if he did play this move, his bishop is no longer defending the e5 pawn, and his opponent could simply capture the pawn with his knight. Therefore, the way we're going to apply a safety check is before you physically pick up the piece and put it down on the square, you're going to spend 5 seconds and quickly ask the question, am I blundering something with this move? Am I putting this piece on an unsafe square, or am I leaving something undefended with this move? It's a very simple thing to do, but you will be surprised how many people forget to do it, and it just takes forgetting to do it one time in order to lose a game that you otherwise would have won. So before you physically finish your move, always perform a safety check. And now that you understand the full system of thinking in-game, tips, what you're going to do is on every single move, you're going to practice doing every single one of these steps. And what you're going to do is after the game, you're going to analyze and see where you made mistakes in your system of thinking. For example, in this student game, he failed to do the safety check, or if he did do a safety check, he failed to identify that his bishop undefended this piece. And that's something that he needs to identify as a weakness later on. Here's another example of a mistake in the student's game that we can analyze afterwards and learn from. In this position, his opponent plays the move bishop captures pawn. And what my student identified in this position was that there was a threat on his knight to win material. So he moved his knight away in order to defend it. However, he failed to identify the threat of bishop takes queen, and he ended up losing his queen. So that is where there's another leak in the system of thinking that we can catch in the analysis and learn from later on. And that's it for this video. You now have a system of thinking to apply pre-game and in-game. In the next video, I'm going to demonstrate a lot of the concepts we've learned up to this point, as well as the system of thinking, by playing a demo game against a bot. In the video after that, I'm going to demonstrate how to analyze games and how to use the analysis features in chess.com or in Lichess, so you can use that for improvement on your own for the rest of your chess career. But other than that, good luck in your future chess games. Have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.